rapidly growing,
nonnative tree species,
consuming,
alien tree species,
adapting,
exotic species.
they conquer.
Forest fire.
Education is very important.
Invasive species.
Strong bark beetle attack.
Risk,
Alien or a non-native.
resistance, heat, timber market, ecosystem services, recreational use, pests,
Jeopardizing local economies.
perception, public biodiversity, urban trees, resilience, future, climate change, global change.
And devastating entire ecosystems.
We are talking about ALPTREES. That's an Interreg Alpine Space funded project.
Welcome to the 11th episode of our ALPTREES podcast series. It's Wednesday, 27th of October 2021, and with me today is one of the leading experts for forest-related science in Switzerland.
I am Peter Brang. I'm a senior scientist at the Swiss Federal Institute for Forest, Snow and Landscape Research in Wilmersdorf. I have training as forest engineer and have now been working in research for more than 25 years, mostly in applied research in silviculture, forest dynamics, forest regeneration, and adaptation to climate change.
Thank you for your time. In the next 20 minutes, you will give our audience an overall view about the situation of non-native tree species in Switzerland. What's the share of non-native trees in forests and urban areas in Switzerland?
I would say, according to the National Forest Inventory, in the forests, it's actually below 1%. So it's really very low, but it's increasing. In urban areas, when you include parks, we don't have real data, but I expect it to be higher, 5-10%, or even slightly higher.
The number of native to non-native tree species seems to be lower in Switzerland than in other countries of the Alpine region.
There is a tradition of close to nature forestry in Switzerland, and probably the people, and including the forest managers in Switzerland, they were often not really favorable of using non-native tree species. When we see who really used it, it was mostly people with academic training. So enterprises led by forestry professionals with a university training who were more open to plant non-native tree species. Yeah.
This close to nature tradition, is this a peculiar Swiss approach that can be explained by the cultural Swiss heritage?
At least I would say it is something that has been anchored also in the legislation and obviously in the minds of the professionals for now about 120 years. But I know that in other countries, such as Slovenia, or also regions, for instance, the Black Forest region, or also some regions of Austria, this has been quite normal. Perhaps it's not, apart from Slovenia, normal at the country level.
Non-native tree species often are perceived as risky and invasive by the general public. How much of this bad reputation have you encountered in Switzerland?
For a long time, it was not really an issue. And I think this is also connected to the fact that there are very few non-native trees in the Swiss forest. Recently, with the discussion about biodiversity and using only native species, there is some concern in the public, but I would still say that there are more people complaining about just leaving the forest unattended than planting whatever is actually then planted.
What's the perception of non-native trees among forest experts and stakeholders in Switzerland?
Yeah, obviously different stakeholders have different perceptions and opinions. In the community of the forestry professionals, Some are quite open. I would say even the majority is quite open to using non-native species. A minority says they don't like them, don't use them at all. You must also know that quite a large number of forests planting always means protecting against browsing. And this is easily feasible if you are on flat terrain in the lowlands with not much snow, but in steep terrain and in the mountains, it's very, very costly. So you usually don't want to plant any tree. And this means if you don't plant, you will not get non-native tree species. You were asking about what perceptions of different stakeholders are. In the community of conservation specialists and also NGOs, they have problems with non-native species. They advocate really doing without them. There is a limited openness if they see that forestry needs also to make some money. You must know that in Switzerland, on average, they don't make money. They actually have a deficit. And so this means there's some understanding that a limited amount of trees that really can be sold could be allowed, but usually there are also very strong opinions against using non-native tree species. And then I would say also the other stakeholders, for them, this is not really an issue. It may be an issue for the timber industry, but the timber industry, if you have just below 1% of the growing stock, they say, okay, this is niche product. We are not interested in this. So they really need something that is produced in larger quantities, and they would be open if this is something like Douglas fir in future, but for the moment, they are not really interested in switching because the amount is just too small.
Speaking of risks and invasiveness, is there any kind of management, especially for non-native trees in Switzerland?
Yeah, there are really concepts and also a practice of trying to get rid of invasive species. The legislation regarding invasive species is clear regarding the tree of heaven, which is perceived as a large problem. So you are not allowed to use it in a forest. However, you are allowed to plant it in gardens, which means it's difficult to really get rid of it, and it's still spreading. For other tree species, we have the case of Robinia. You are not prohibited from using it in the forest. It's very rarely done, but obviously there are many regions where it is present. I would say most of the management of non-native plant species is actually not directed towards trees. It's more managing herbs that are also spreading in forests, like ambrosia. There was some debate about the invasiveness of Douglas fir, and the state of knowledge is that apart from very exceptional and rare sites, it's not really a problem.
The increased use of non-native trees in forests and urban areas within the alpine space is debated as one of the measures to adapt tree populations and green spaces to climate change. Is there a plan for Switzerland to use non-native tree species more often in regards of future forestry and city planning?
Yeah, they are actually increasing now. So what is quite often done is planting Douglas fir. People try to use them. For instance, Atlas cedar is increasingly used, but this is at a very small scale.
That means that all your protective forests, they are in good health and a good situation. How would you describe the situation of the health of forests in Switzerland?
If you would have asked me 3 years ago, I would have said, okay, the forest is in quite good shape, apart from the browsing impact. But the adult trees are in good shape. And now with summer droughts, which we had, we have regional health problems in major tree species, also like beech and fir. This for spruce, this is an older story. So we had health problems before, but now we have also other species that are regionally affected. The question is what comes after them if they die back. And usually the foresters would try to regenerate the forest by natural means. This means planting nothing. If this does not really work, for instance, in terms of density, which can be achieved, or in terms of adaptiveness of the species that are regenerating, they will plant or at least complement the natural regeneration with planting. And then there is the question, which species? And I would say in many cases, you still have native species used, like oak, which is then planted. Looking at conifers, I would say in many cases, it's actually now Douglas fir, which is being planted.
Are non-native tree species already embedded in the legal framework in Switzerland?
On the level of the government and also of the parliament, there are now initiatives to promote the transition of the forest, just to ensure that the services of the forests are maintained. Mostly this is over spending, so giving incentives to forest managers, forest enterprises for taking measures to adapt forests. This may be to solve health problems, but it can also be for planting trees.
What is your role in the forthcoming future for the forests? Do you have some power, some impact on politicians, on stakeholders to promote non-native trees, to promote this issue at all?
I would say I have actually quite a large impact. Perhaps I'm overestimating it now. It's perhaps not me personally, but it's the community of those that are doing research and training in this field. And obviously they are shaping the mindset of the people. We had a substantial research program starting in 2009, and there were over 50 projects in it, and I was the coordinator of this initiative. And the issue of non-native tree species was also addressed in these initiatives. And now when you look what is going on in research, it's continuing. So we have a large project where we test about 18 tree species with several provenances all over Switzerland, including 3 to 4 non-native species, depends on what you count as non-native. There are older trials which we are maintaining so trials of non-native tree species. And I'm also involved in a tool which we call Tree App. And it's actually an app which you can use on a mobile phone or also on a personal computer, which helps to find recommended tree species for any point in Switzerland. And obviously, non-native tree species play a role in this. So I would say the impact could be quite large. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What tree species are those 3 you mentioned?
The 3 we are testing here is Douglas fir, Turkish hazel, and the Atlas cedar.
The Interreg ALPTREES project is set up as a transnational project. How much is Switzerland involved in a transnational or a transregional strategy in terms of cross-border thinking and acting as a non-EU member?
Yeah, I think we are probably less implemented than other countries in the alpine space. This partly depends on the arrangements with the European Union. And obviously, at the moment, this connection is not working so well. Finally, this depends also largely on the initiatives of individuals. So in a forest administrations, but also in research. And I would say in research, the connections are functional.
So there is a scientific data flow, irrespective of the superordinate political level.
And yeah, it follows other other rules.
What is the relationship between Switzerland and Liechtenstein regarding the forestry sector?
So regarding research, we take care of Liechtenstein because our understanding is that they don't have an own research institute. It's just too small. The same applies to training. So the foresters professionals are mostly trained in Switzerland, the few that exist in Liechtenstein. But I think regarding how the forest administration works and the legislation there, this is quite independent. So I told you about the tree app. And the funny thing was that we actually also made this tool available to Liechtenstein, and we were able to do this because they had the similar data. The tree app is a tool that can be used in the whole country, but it can be used more effectively if you have all the forest communities mapped. So, for instance, Mesic Beech Forest or whatever the forest community is. And actually, Liechtenstein was the second region who had their maps introduced in the tree app before about 25 cantons, which may follow or not in the future. So you see these connections, they work.
Is there something that would be very important to know about Switzerland and the use of non-native trees?
Yeah, perhaps what people tend to forget is that over the last 150 years, we know that about 100 to 150 tree species were actually used in forests, most on a very small scale. But people tried to plant them and for different purposes, but I think most was for the purpose of production. And when we see now what the result is, we see just very few of those that were that are still being planted. Regarding this, we should really see the reality that we cannot expect that there will be a solution for adapting forests to climate change. They will play a certain minor role. This is my opinion.
Do you also have increased wildfires in Switzerland this year?
This year, not. I think in this year probably we had less wildfires, but obviously in dry summers we have wildfires. In southern Switzerland is less of a summer problem. It's more of a winter problem because the winters are especially dry. We have the problem of wildfires and we see that they are increasing, but I think we also know how to handle this. So actually, when you look at a long term, you see that in the regions where we have large wildfire problems, they are able to reduce the amount of fires over time. It's mainly an issue of proper management, including communication and being prepared if the fire happens. And we are not so prepared north of the Alps yet, but the fires will increase and it's very likely they will. It's foreseeable. Then we know now how to manage the problem.
So for you personally, are non-native trees an option for the future for the forests?
Yeah, they are clearly an option, which will be used, but probably not at a large scale. I see them more as admixtures in mixed stands. This is in line with the current practice, and I don't see that there will be large changes.
Peter Brang, thank you very much for this brief insight into the management of non-native tree species in forests and urban areas in Switzerland. Thank you and goodbye.
So goodbye till the next podcast.